Okay, sweet. Hey guys, welcome to the sixth edition of Product Hackers. Super excited as to how far we've come. Super stoked with the lineup that we had today. I was speaking to Sav about this last week, and I was like, man, most of the work that where the field that we operate in and the kind of companies that we work with, it's usually that scale up startup space, product companies that are really operating in a niche and growing, especially in Melbourne's backyard. And I thought, man, why don't we do a topic surrounding startups? And I'm super excited for the edition this week. But as always, thank you to All Squares. We're a recruitment company. We actually recruit in the digital product space. So myself, Danny Hansard, or Julian Viard, if you want to get in touch, shoot me a connection request on LinkedIn, say hello. Always here for a chat. Keen to let you know of what's going on in the market. But yeah, I'll pass this on to Sav. Take it away.
Cool. Thanks, mate. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Awesome. So yeah, as Sammy said, this is our sixth edition of Product Hackers, and really excited for the topic today around product management in startups. I feel as though this is a topic which is one that is really super difficult to be a product manager at a startup. I think that it requires such a rounded skill set. You have to sort of be that big thinking person. You have to be an educator and teach people about the process. You have to be a seller. You have to be super versatile to play different roles of, like, whether that's in product marketing or product management or strategy. And there's very few people, I think, that do all of that really well and can cope with the uncertainty and lack of clarity and chaos and turn that chaos into something that is, directional and heading the company towards their North Star. So I feel as though today we're going to learn a lot. I certainly am going to learn a lot and ask a lot of questions. And we've got three great presenters in Karina, Nathan, and Tom. And we're going to kick off with Karina, who is currently a product manager at Rip a Ride. I'm going to get her to say a couple of words about that. She's also got some really great startup experience. I think looking through her LinkedIn, she's worked for Tribe, which is a company founded by Jules Lund. She's had a lot of incubator experience, and might ask her a few questions on that as well. So generally a lot of startup experience. So looking forward to hearing about what she has to say today, which she's going to tell us a little bit more about doing more with less, which is definitely something that you need to learn to do at a startup, no doubt. So Karina, I'll get you to switch on your screen and share your presentation, and we'll kick off with you.
Start with unmuting myself is usually a good first step.
Awesome.
Bear with me one sec. All right. All right. So, hey, everybody. Happy Friday. I hope you're celebrating the end of the week with a beer like I am. So my career journey has been an interesting one. My favorite question to ask product managers is what they studied at uni. It's always something quite different. I started out as a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed journalist in Queensland, but when the GFC shook up the media industry, I made the move to educational publishing. I'd always been a bit of a digital native though, so when I moved to Melbourne in 2012, I scored a digital editor gig at Pearson, which is a big global educational publisher. While I was there, I studied part-time and then moved into instructional design, which is a field that's kind of like user experience design, but for learning. And that kind of gave me the skills I needed to sidestep into product management. So I'm pretty creative, I'm bossy, and I like to talk a lot, so it felt like a natural fit. Since then, I've worked with quite a few startups, both in-house and via a startup consultancy, as Sav mentioned. But I'm now at a growing startup called Rip a Ride, which is basically a platform that lets people book regional escapes and have self-fulfilling experiences in nature. So like most startup PMs, I am wearing all the hats. So despite some solid growth at Rip a Ride, our product team is actually quite small. It's just me and two absolutely wonderful engineers. We actually only have like 10 people in the entire company. But we do practice what we preach. We really embrace like the work-life balance thing, and we don't work long hours. So we just find more ways to be efficient. So anyway, I'm going to share some of the things that have helped our small team achieve big things at RipperRide. Okay, so firstly, asking for permission will slow you down. So at RipperRide, having autonomy is one of the main reasons we've been able to move quickly and do more with less. We're guided by the vision of the founder and the goals of the business, but we're empowered to come up with ideas and deliver product solutions. When I first started working with RipperRide, I was actually with a startup consultancy, which was called Moonshot Labs, and RipperRide was one of our clients. And the typical kind of client agency relationship meant that every sprint needed to be signed off and every product iteration green-lighted for release. So that caused us quite a lot of bottlenecks. It slowed us down. And I think the lack of autonomy made it quite difficult for us to innovate. Fast forward a couple of years though, and then Moonshot Labs merged with RipperRide and we became an in-house product team. Interesting story, but I'm not going to go into all that now. But we were able to gain autonomy quite quickly by building trust. So we did this by exposing the method to our madness. I found that to be, super valuable, I guess. In our fortnightly sprint demos, I'd take everyone on a journey and explain, why we build things in the way that we did and why we didn't do it another way. And I'd always back it up with data. Taking people on that journey gave them an insight into your process, and in turn that kind of builds trust. It's less about trusting you than it is more about trusting your method. But having autonomy doesn't mean it's your way or the highway though. It's still really important to listen and take in feedback. If you're open and collaborative, founders and stakeholders will be far more confident to give you autonomy, knowing that when it's important, you'll be receptive. So ruthless prioritization is really important to achieving more with less. And in this sense, I mean more in business value more. So keep things simple, never add unnecessary features that can complicate the product. Leaner features are quicker to build and a leaner product is easier to maintain. Say no more than you say yes. This probably won't make you the most popular person in the business, but you really do need to get good at saying no to incoming requests. It doesn't have to always be a flat out no, but you could suggest an alternative or keep it on ice to prioritize in the future. Definitely don't become a feature factory. So you want to focus on solving problems and delivering value, not just building features. There's often more than one solution to solve a problem, and it's not always the obvious one. By focusing on the problem, it lets you explore simple solutions. Always ask, what's the simplest way we can solve this? And that doesn't mean you can't have a vision and design beautiful product experiences. You can and you totally should, but you don't have to implement everything from the beginning. Cherry pick from your designs and then keep them on ice for when you're ready to iterate later. I have a rule that 5 people need to have the same problem before I prioritize a feature to solve it. When you work for a startup, things can change quite quickly. So you never want to solve hypothetical problems. If you did, and then suddenly you had to pivot tomorrow, it'd be for nothing. I can't tell you how many features I've added to my icebox only to then go and delete later because they're just not relevant anymore. The other reason it's good to wait until a problem hurts is that you actually learn a lot by helping your users through their problem. And then those learnings help you build better solutions down the track. So innovation doesn't happen easily. It takes time and effort to design something brand new, never seen before, and that actually works and delivers value to users. And you should do that for the parts of your product that matter, 100%. The parts that will delight your customers, set you apart from the competition and impress investors, etc. But for everything else, honestly, follow the beaten path. Under the hood, RipperRide has a travel booking engine, quite similar to Airbnb. I hate saying that, but the plumbing of it is quite similar. But when we're building basic booking and listing management functionality, we absolutely do take inspiration from them. Airbnb has a huge team who have tried and tested lots of solutions. So we can move quicker by leveraging that. Not to mention, a lot of our users are also users of Airbnb. So not reinventing the wheel means that they don't have to learn to do things in different ways. So make sure you're continuously improving and refactoring as you go, and listen to your developers when they tell you that something needs to be refactored. I think when you build a new feature, especially in a startup, you usually want to build it in the quickest way. And we do that all the time. But soon you'll come back to that part of the app and want to iterate on it in some way. In the past, I've made the mistake of not listening to my developers when they tell me that it needs to be refactored because maybe it will take more time. And that might work for a little while, but soon enough, it comes back to bite you, and often at very critical times when you need to be able to move quickly, but then you're slowed down by debt. like with the bushfires this year and then COVID, thank you 2020, we've had to be really responsive to changes in our market. So keeping our app in really good shape by continually refactoring things has allowed us to turn around some pretty big new features in like a day or two when we've needed to sort of respond to these changing conditions. Also, if you have features in your product that no one uses, kill them. It's really hard to make the call to deprecate a feature, especially when you like personally thought it might have been a great idea. But getting into the habit of doing that will actually help you create a leaner product. At Ripper Ride, we used to have 4 listing categories: accommodation, experiences, vehicles, and equipment. And each category had different requirements for searching and displaying listing information and booking. So even though some of those categories were getting bookings, it wasn't enough to justify the feature debt they created in the product. So streamlining the site and going all in on accommodation was honestly one of the best things we did. It let us focus our efforts, not just in products, but across the entire business. So as a startup PM, you often hear other PMs talk about their experiences and the way they do things. And honestly, it can feel like you're in a completely different job. I can't tell you how often I've been to a conference and listened to, amazing product managers from companies like Netflix and awesome, places talk. And it's like you feel completely different. It doesn't always resonate. So you're not always going to have the time and budget to do things like they do in bigger companies, but nor should you. One of the biggest assets in a small team is your ability to be nimble and experiment. Use that to your advantage. Find shortcuts and hacks. I rarely do things the same way twice in the beginning. And definitely don't create processes because you think you should. Wait to feel the pain of something before you implement a process for it. So build a solid automated test suite. It allows you to quickly and confidently make changes without breaking things. I spend a lot of time doing QA on new features. That's one of the many hats I wear. But I absolutely don't have time to regression test our entire app every time we ship something new. My team has been building tests for every feature that we've shipped from day one, and I can't tell you how valuable that is to us now. That said, you don't want to automate everything from day one. That wouldn't be good use of time in a startup. But you do want to be able to do more with less in a small team as your business and product grow. You definitely want to start building automation into your workflows. Throwing more people at the problem is often less efficient than finding ways to automate. Having data at your fingertips about how people are using your product and helps you make quick decisions. And it's not something you can retrofit. Make sure you're tracking things and collecting data from day one. Pick a solid product analytics tool. I recommend Amplitude for startups because it works well and they have a generous free tier. And build events for every important user interaction. You don't need events for every single button click, but that'll just weigh you down. But definitely for things that provide business value or insight into user behavior. The one thing I wouldn't cut corners on. When you have a small team and you're busy wearing a lot of hats, doing user research and getting feedback from your customers can be quite tricky to juggle. But there is a lot of ways that you can get user feedback that don't take much time, effort, or money. For example, I use Hotjar to watch screen recordings every time we ship something new and identify any UX issues, or to learn about how people are using different features. I also set quick in-app polls to capture user feedback or ask short survey questions. They take a minute to set up and you can capture ongoing feedback at scale. Another great way to get easy customer feedback is by manning the support desk, which you probably already do if you're a startup PM. We use Intercom for customer support, and jumping in and helping people through their issues is one of the best ways to stay connected to your users. So wearing all the hats in a startup is one of the things that can help you do more with fewer people. But it also does mean that you're doing quite a lot of context switching, and that can feel quite chaotic. But at the same time, it is super rewarding and can be a lot of fun. Personally, I wouldn't have it any other way. And then just before I wrap up, I have one shameless plug, because as good as we are at doing more with less, we would really like to start doing more with more. So if you guys know any amazing design or marketing guns with a closet full of hats, send them our way. That's it from me, guys.
Thanks for that. That was awesome. As I mentioned before, I think one of the roles is a bit of a educator and taking people on the journey. Do you think that your background in, like, I think you mentioned education is sort of like a skill that you've really brought to this?
Yeah, 100%.
And leveraged?
100%.
Yeah, right.
I honestly think too, so like I started out in like as a journalist, and my undergrad is in sort of communications. And honestly,
Yeah.
if I think about the one skill that has helped me be the sort of all-rounder, it's really like that ability, like being able to like communicate via words. You know, like being able to write, you do product writing, you know, we send out marketing emails, we need to, you know, write, you know, there's so many different ways that a product manager needs to write. And I really feel that's like one of my biggest advantages, but definitely the education stuff too. Like, you know, like being able to, I mean, like practically you write help documentation and things like that, but also just, you know, sort of designing your product in a way that, you know, I guess helps people kind of use it easily and navigate through it well.
Yeah.
It's all very linked.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that. I'll have more questions at the end. I think next
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Next, we're moving on to Nathan, who's going to be talking to us about facilitating product decisions, which is quite important as well. Nathan's the VP of Technology at Edrolo. Over to you, mate. If you've got your, got everything on screen.
Working.
Cool.
Is that coming through okay?
Yep, completely fine.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm Nathan. I'm the VP of Technology at Edrolo, and I've been here since virtually day one, which was about 7 years ago. On Edrolo, you could think of us as a modern textbook publisher creating digital resources for high school classrooms. Now, this many hats idea feels super relevant to me, as my job has sort of always been a mixture of designer, front-end developer, engineering manager, and product management. So I'm going to share some lessons I've learned along the way about wearing these hats and trying to take care of a product as your company grows and things get more complex. So we'll start the story out in 2013 when Edrolo had 5 people. So like any company trying to find, you know, product market fit with a small team, things are going to be fast paced, and the way in which you make product can be, you know, fairly straightforward. You know, you're always working on the most important thing. You do that and you move on to the next, and you don't necessarily have a ton of, you know, distractions or obstacles involved in the process of getting something out the door. And you may not even be thinking all too much about, you know, what these projects are costing or how long they might take, because you're probably going so fast that, you know, it probably doesn't really matter. But if you're lucky or you're doing things well, things can start to change quite quickly. So in my case, I saw the company change around me rather rapidly. So at Edrolo, a big part of what we offer to our customers sort of exists outside of what you might call pure software. So things like how we sell to and work very closely with schools, the content that we produce all in-house, and the support that we provide our customers. So like many companies, or probably most companies, growth doesn't just mean that you'll see more engineers and designers and product managers come in. It means you'll see your sales department get bigger and your support team will get bigger. And in our case as well, our content team got much bigger very quickly. So today we've got roughly over 150 people. So things change, right? And what does it mean? I mean, change becomes harder, largely because decisions are harder to make. And that's because those decisions have more impact on more people. And you build inertia behind every existing system, workflow, and feature. So this is obvious stuff, but the earlier you have strategies for dealing with this, the better off you'll be. Excuse me. So I'm going to share some tips that I wish I'd probably learned earlier on, in the hope it might be of use to some people who are in a startup now that is ready for growth and is going to face some problems like this. So this is all sort of from the lens that you're someone tasked with steering the ship from a software point of view, or what we typically call product in these kind of scenes. So you want your plans or your roadmap. It will benefit massively if it has authority behind it. So your roadmap shouldn't just represent your hopes and desires as a team or department, but it should be your actual confirmed plan. Otherwise, your plans can be compromised by whatever feels urgent right now to other senior stakeholders. So this is not about being adversarial or non-cooperative. It's just about making other departments in your org take your roadmap as seriously as you do. What do I mean by the highest possible level? It's going to depend on your company and how it's structured. If you're still small, you probably need to make sure it's your CEO or your founders that are the active decision makers. Or if you've grown beyond that, yeah, then it might be someone else. But you don't sort of try and start seeking broad consensus across the org. Figure out whose job it is to make these decisions and help them as much as you can. And I find in a role that resembles a product manager or product lead in a smallish company, it can be of great value to have that person not be you. So you don't want to wear every single hat, because then your discussions about your plans, your roadmap, and not just about your opinion versus someone else's. And it means that changes to your plan is going to require the facilitation of well-considered, very senior decisions. So this defends your team and your plans. Now, doing this isn't always easy. Whoever it is that helps you make these decisions or makes these decisions, they're probably responsible for much more than deciding which projects you work on. You know, they're allocating capital, working out headcount across a range of departments and solving whatever the biggest, most immediate problem is for your business at the moment. So what we're going to build in 6 months is often less immediately urgent than what's keeping your CEO up late at night. So how can you help them? What can you actually do? Again, this will be different at every company. Some companies might have a kind of, product visionary type founder who just wants to hear your good ideas and can make decisions intuitively. And some companies are going to be far more calculated. But either way, I've got some things here that might help in making things move smoothly. Ultimately, if these decision makers have the information they need, you're ready to spend a productive hour with them and then let them get back to whatever is keeping them up at night. So I don't know why, but it took me too long to get comfortable with this. It's really easy to say things like, oh, you can't measure the revenue impact of this feature or the return on good design, or that estimate's always wrong or whatever it is. And none of these excuses are completely untrue either, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. You can be honest about money, which means acknowledging the degree to which you're guessing, while also building trust about the subject. And that's by showing over time that your predictions are true enough to be useful. So where can you start to try and build your capability and trust talking about money? So I don't want to rant too much about agile stuff. There's so many ways to do these things, and you want the right amount of process to suit your current situation, as Karina kind of said. I just want to focus on some basics that I found really useful that might help you get a basic system in place that you can lean on to build trust with important people. So we'll go through this quickly. Obviously, you want easy estimates. We'll use t-shirt sizes. That's what many people use. And let's say in this example, a small is a day's work. Then give these sizes a number that makes sense. So let's call a small 3 points, a medium could be 10, whatever it is, just stick with it for a while. Then you can measure how many points are delivered each sprint and average that out over time. So let's say on average, your team delivers 30 points. Now it's easy to work out what a sprint costs just based on salaries and how much of your team's time is actually spent on project delivery. So let's say in this example, you spend $8,000 a sprint, $8,000 divided by 30 points, a point costs you $266. And that's all you need. So it's from here, you can say a project with 20 smalls is 60 points, costs you just under 16K. Now, this is massively powerful for you. And it's based in evidence and measured output. It's not just a plain old guess. And then your team starts to know what a small is. And even though it nearly always takes longer than that 1 day estimate, you're measuring the end cost of that estimate and not the hourly or daily prediction by your engineers. And this isn't so you can make financial promises. It's helping you facilitate decision-making. And it's also going to help you deal with stakeholders on emergent or kind of urgent decision-making. You might get that request from, it doesn't matter where it's from, something apparently needs to be sorted out right away. But intuitively, let's say, it's a medium to sort it out. So instead of just saying things like, oh, it's a bit harder than you think, or we're too busy, those things never come across well. You can say something like, oh, it'll cost $2,000, it'll take about a week, and it delays the delivery of project X. And then immediately that person can put that into context with the size of their problem, and they might realize they can wrangle their own solution that's faster and cheaper. Because, these people don't know how hard things are, and that's not their fault. It's your job to help them understand that, and money can do that really, really well. It's obviously a very common language, and people often underestimate how things cost, so help them. You're also going to have to start to speculate about, the actual monetary returns on projects when you can. Sometimes you can use monetary values. A project might be about optimizing a sales funnel, so you just have to do the maths on how it might affect that revenue flow, or it might be a workflow optimization. You can say this project will save 10 people 4 hours a week, and you can do the maths on that. And when you're doing this stuff, just be clear and honest about the degree to which you're guessing. And you'll find that other senior stakeholders will appreciate that, and they'll help you calibrate your guesses. And when they're doing that, they'll believe them even more because they've had input. And sometimes it can't be a figure, and that's fine too. But at least explicitly explain where, what the upside is for the business. Basic things like, if our customers are happier, then there'll be less churn, or this new internal tool will reduce future headcount. None of this stuff is rocket science, but the more you talk about it, the better off you'll be, and the more you'll be listened to. So this leads off that last one. So you've now got a way to guess at how much things are planned to cost and then how much they actually cost. And you understand this better than anyone. So you want to keep this as your domain. What else can help is providing options. So let's say a project is perceived as being too expensive to be viable. Don't just squeeze your budget, propose a different solution with a different cost, and obviously explain the trade-offs in that. So there might be that it's a less ideal user experience or more manual work for an internal team or whatever it is, but it's going to be so much better to have decision makers acknowledge and absorb these trade-offs than you just kind of sucking it up and being sad about it. And it's providing options here, but staying strong on costings. That means you're negotiating about things you can control. And you're going to be squeezed less on things like team morale or things like technical debt, which Karina spoke about as well. These are the things that suffer when you provide the same solution at a cheaper price. When you do that, you actually reinforce to decision makers behaviors that you don't want to see. They'll think they're saving money, but in reality, you're probably overworking your team and ruining your system. And both these things will cost you money just later on. And as Karina has said, often in a way that you can't plan for or even understand very well. So you've done all the hard stuff now. You've got your most senior people making good decisions based on cost and potential return. At this point, you can really give them full control over your roadmap using very simple tools. So we used to do this with just pieces of paper on a whiteboard. And you can get your senior people just to move them around to suit your current strategy and the timelines in your business. In a remote setting, I've been using Dropbox Paper, which is worth a look. It's free and it's not a project management tool. It just simply allows you to create these objects and move them around on a timeline really easily. So yeah, but then you can just hand that power over and let decisions be made, and you've got a roadmap that lets you get to work. This is on technical debt, which has been spoken about a little bit. It just comes down to the fact that software is way harder to maintain than most people realize, and it's not their fault that they don't realize. So you need to be able to confidently say things like, this project is expensive because our system doesn't currently afford what we're trying to achieve very well. And you can say that. You and your team can't really be argued with on this. You know best. So stand strong when the reality of the system is not in line with what's wanting to be achieved. And keeping your system sane is actually directly linked to your chance of success. If your systems are getting worse, getting more complicated, every project will obviously take longer and have more surprises, and it's going to reflect poorly on you and your teams. So the longer I do this sort of work, the more happy I am to say when I don't know. So be clear about when you have no idea, or be clear when your guess is a big guess, and be clear when you have faith in your guess. If you're willing to admit or demonstrate when you're unsure, it gives your actual predictions, more currency. And finally here, so the assumption here is that you're in a leadership position and you're largely responsible for technology and software and what we typically call product, the stuff that designers and developers build. And you're figuring out how to interface with other departments through company growth. Remember that you're in an incredibly enviable position. Like, your department and your team has this magic ability to create things that can do the jobs of dozens or hundreds of people. And these are things that other leaders in your org, they can't really achieve without hiring more people or onboarding them, building management structures for them and all that sort of stuff. So they probably all want a piece of you, and there's an almost unlimited amount of productive things you could do to potentially help them. But unfortunately, even no matter how big your company is, you can't do them all. You can't even get close. So sometimes the best thing you can do, we spoke about this before, is help them understand that, work on building great relationships, and think of your job as being one of facilitating good decisions. People will respect you for that. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. I really like the use. I think I've struggled with this in the past, and I think that you're absolutely right about how money is sort of a common language for everyone. And I feel like even a lot of founders, if you don't have that conversation with them, they can't make the trade-offs themselves. Like, for example, if they're doing something manually at the moment, and you say, like, to automate and build this as a product, it's going to cost you $50,000, then they can think, oh, okay, so should I just hire another person, or should I go with this option, and so on and so forth. And they can start to make those trade-offs. But if you haven't articulated that, or even a ballpark, it makes it very difficult for them, especially if they're not from a tech background.
Absolutely. As I said, there's always hundreds, if not thousands, of good things to build.
Yeah.
You can't decide which ones are appropriate unless you can start to bring money into the equation sometimes. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, no worries.
Lots of questions coming through for you as well, so we'll get to them. Finally, last but definitely not least, we've got Tom, who is the head of product at Bcastle. He will be talking about a really interesting topic related to requiring a village to build a company and a product. Tom, you can switch your camera on and share your presentation. I'd love to hear a little bit about Bcastle as well. And for anyone who's got any questions, please feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, and me and Sammy will have a look at it.
Thanks, Sav. Can you hear me and see everything? It's all working?
It is all working. I can see plain white at the moment.
Oh, it's coming. It's coming.
Okay, yeah, cool.
I love an animation. Love an animation. Happy to
episode.
Nathan and Karina, by the way. That was awesome. So hi, Tom. I'm, as Sav mentioned, I work in product at Bcastle. What is Bcastle? We're a relatively new startup that's working on helping professional service organizations, think lawyers, consultants, IT consultants, get more out of their relationships. And so how can they use data and analytics ultimately to build stronger connections with their network and their customers? And so I guess before I start, I guess I'll give two quick warnings. One is this is obviously a little bit of a personal story. So obviously it's applicable to me, and I don't know how generalizable it is, but that's one side of the things. And then the second one is the stage of our company. So compared to kind of Edrolo, which have done amazing things and kind of further progressed than we are, I've only kind of relatively recently, in the last 2 years, jumping into Bcastle, moved into startup world. And I guess that's why when I was asked about, the different hats that a startup product manager has to wear, I actually went to kind of my personal experience, and particularly the emotional side of becoming a product manager at a startup, and how different it was from my previous experience. So I guess that's the story I'll be telling. So I guess my career, increasing the story of my career, Karina mentioned, what did you study? I was going to become a neuropsych, which is very different, but I really like software and decided to jump into software towards the end of uni. But out of uni, I joined Telstra, a big behemoth. I was lucky enough to then jump, and a couple of other corporates, I was lucky enough to then jump into Tyro, which I'm not sure if you guys know, but quite a well-established tech company that was kind of a rocket ship when I joined. And so I was a product manager at Tyro. And I guess, and then only recently I've jumped into Bcastle as a founder. And one of the interesting things for me making the jump from Tyro to Bcastle was, at Tyro, the job and the different hats that were worn were quite, they were worn by different parties, and the jobs of everyone in the company were quite clear. Prospects talk to sales, account management talk to customers, design, obviously the researchers and participants talk to designers, the channel manager talk to partners. So the roles were quite clearly defined. And even internally, the peers I had as a product manager, there were many of them, and I could rely on them, and I knew who they were. Even believers, like the believers in Tyro, the people that believed in the mission and really supported the company inside and out, they were already established. And so when I look back at it, even though, when I went into product, I was thinking, you're the CEO of the product. Really, my role was quite narrow in scope. My safe place was working with customers, researching what they needed, working with the technical team to build product. Sales, I was obviously interested in. Partnerships, I was an interested party, but my safe space was building product. However, then obviously we founded this company together with kind of 3 or 4 people. And I think inspired by, you know, the Jeffs of the world who talk about having a customer obsession and having no distractions and being obsessed at the customer, but potentially just because I liked living in my safe space. When I first joined the startup as a product manager, I was very narrow in my focus. I am going to focus all of my time on product. I'm going to focus all of my time on customer. I'm going to focus all of my time around what are we building? Does it solve a problem? What are we building? Does it solve a problem? And that sounded like the obvious thing to do. However, and you know, we've made some great gains in those early days. However, as the only kind of product manager in the team, I started to feel a little bit of doubt and a little bit of anxiety. And in a way, feeling like I lived in a little bit of an echo chamber. And you know, I had a great team that we were working with, and we had great early customers that we were working with. But I felt in a way with the customers I had my face on and the team, it was so small that I really wasn't having many conversations. I wasn't allowed to kind of release my anxieties, my concerns, bounce ideas off people. However, as in an early stage startup with 4 people, as Karina and Nathan have mentioned, you do everything. So I was made, and quite reluctantly, to talk to customers and be the salesperson for the company. I became the partnership development manager. I became the main primary way in which our company interacted with peers in the industry. And ultimately, it was a lot of mine and our job to find believers in our concept, even if they weren't customers. And so I reluctantly took on these roles. However, the more I did it, one thing I recognized was these conversations that we're having that I felt in a way wasn't my natural space and wasn't my role. They were actually some of the most impactful conversations and relationships we built. And in particular, what it allowed us to do while taking on these different hats of being the salesperson, being the partnership manager, or just finding that person in the industry that's a believer in you, was I and the team were able to find good allies. And I think one of the kind of patterns or themes that I've seen particularly in B2B startups like ours, a lot of the really great product managers are community builders. And they're able to find people that believe in the purpose, not just the team. Obviously, the team that are building it with you have to believe in the purpose, but they find people external to the organization that can do that. By having these different conversations, I was able to actually have multiple different feedback loops. So it wasn't just a maniacal one single conversation with the customer, which is obviously the most important, but we could learn from our peers and we could build new relationships in the industry or build those kind of influencer networks. And like personally, just kind of, I guess, selfishly, it allowed you to kind of release in those early days and be a lot more authentic and get more feedback personally as a product manager. And so I guess from my side, as we went along, I was much more intentional and focused on building connections and basically building good relationships and allies in all of these different stakeholders. You know, what used to seem like a distraction seemed really valuable and has proven really valuable to us. You know, I look back and look at those different stakeholder groups that I talked about before. You know, the early research participants we work with became our biggest referrers. You know, the partners we built, or like the partners we talked about just to get experience, we really built a channel off those relationships we built early. The peers in the tech industry and in our industry in kind of IT services, really, they've helped us pivot our strategy multiple times. And I don't think I would have had the intellectual capacity to do it. And ultimately, some of those true believers that we've found, they've been like our initial hires. And so I guess the point of this talk, and obviously it's very different from a topic, is those different hats you wear in a really early stage startup, particularly when you're coming from a larger organization and a more focused role. You may resent it or be hesitant to really to jump in. But for me, I've learned that it's actually an opportunity to create that network of good allies, to build that community. And to be honest, at least from our experience at BCastle, that community is what's made us successful, and that what will make us successful. And I guess to summarize, if we could do it again, and if I could start again from day dot with a blank sheet of paper with the team, I would actually be a lot more intentional about creating a network for myself and for the team, and building those allies early, and having the peer group, having the partners, having customers, and having just those believers from day dot. Because I think it paid off for the business, but ultimately for myself as well. And that's it.
Thanks very much. I've got a question for you, actually.
Yep.
It's obviously a lot of hats that you had to wear, and I think the same goes for all three of you, actually. Like, when is there too much context switching and too much? You know, I think Paul Graham wrote this article about, you know, makers and managers, and how makers sort of need their dedicated time, and managers like can context switch and things like that. But when does it become too much for you? Like, have you reached that point? And yeah,
I think Nathan, and probably Nathan can talk to the other side of this, had a good point in terms of the stage of where your business and company is at. Because obviously for when you're starting out, and even we're graduating, so I'd say it's getting close, Sav. But
yeah.
In the early days, because the focus, you are so focused on a problem, a customer, like a certain persona, and you kind of know what you need to solve, and it's how do I solve it, and how do I build momentum around it, and how to, you know, or don't forget those go-to-market things, by the way, for the people on the call. Like, you are selling something, so that's an important piece as well. That I think that focus allows you to have more breadth in terms of what you do. Whereas I'm imagining, and just from my experience at Tyro, which had gone through that process, as you mature and you scale and you broaden from a product perspective, broaden from go-to-market, broaden the way that you operate, you know, that's when you just have to go, okay, we need experts, and I need to trust them, and we have to put processes in place. So I think it's a thing you mature into, I guess.
Yeah, cool.
I don't know, I guess what Nathan and Karina think on that. They're at a different stage.
Yeah, I think I think one thing with like wearing all the hats and context switching is that you do a lot of things, but you can't do all of them really well. And that gets you by for a long time, because in the beginning, it's not about doing everything perfectly, right? When you're validating a new idea and you're building product market fit, you need to solve a problem. You don't have to have the most, like, the fastest, the most beautiful product on the market. You just have to do, you know, a few things well. And so, but I think you do get to the point where suddenly you realize that, like, I really want to level up in design, or we really need to level up in this other area. And you just can't do that when you're spread so thin. So yeah, I really feel like that's the moment when you realize that one, maybe a few areas are starting to slide and you want to level up. That you got to get specialists in, because yeah, I mean, I don't have a designer on my team, so
Yeah.
You know, thankfully Ripperide, you know, gets lots of nice feedback on its design. Whew, you know, but like we've been like, you know, like, yeah, we've struggled in that department. So yeah, I totally feel it.
Yeah, I'd only add, if there's no possible way for you right now to carve out a few hours a day of actual meaningful work where you're able to solve hard problems, then you're completely, you're in a bad place, and you've got to fix that, right? Yeah. So that's a good sign. And then if you're in that position, don't be afraid to hire someone to do what might be your favorite part of the job. Yeah, it might be the best thing you can possibly do. Yeah.
I'm staying on this. We had actually a question from someone, and Nathan, it was regarding something that you suggested around, you know, points and costing out basically the points, and their question was more around like, how do you have confidence in estimation around like, this is going to be 3 smalls or 3 large, and secondly, have you utilized that same system, and how could you utilize that same system to request additional headcount?
Yeah, I'd almost go as far to say it's going to be really hard to kind of make a good resourcing kind of argument without doing some of these fundamentals right.
Yeah.
Like, this is how you demonstrate that your business can make decisions about your team based on simple things like money. If all you can do is offer platitudes about the things you're building, the money's going to go to other departments who have more immediate blood on the floor problems that can be solved through immediate capital spend. And often things like whether it's support or, whatever it is, often you spend the money and it fixes it right away. But in product, it's actually much harder. So you need to be more sophisticated in some ways than those other teams around making, arguments around headcount and resourcing. It's not easy though. It's really hard. Yeah.
No.
Can I jump in on that? I think also, like Nathan, I'm really fascinated by the estimation topic, and I think it's for me a big cultural issue that the key to estimation is trust. And so if you have trust with each other in the team, that will get better over time, and it will become more accurate, and it will be used in the right ways. But the team just has to. So I think in a way there's the mechanics of estimation and resourcing, but it's also fundamentally comes down to trust, right? As a team.
Yeah, and you do need to help your team be consistent across the team in what they're like. So if every team member is calling, like when they're saying something's a small, and if that's consistent, then it solves a lot of the problems. But if one person's saying it's an extra large and one person saying it's extra small, then you got problems to solve.
It takes time to get that right as well. Like you learn, like, at the beginning, your estimations are a little bit more of a finger in the wind. And I think embrace that as well. Be like, look, I don't know, we're solving problems we haven't solved before. It's natural for people to not be able to estimate those things. If we were doing things exactly the same way as everyone else was doing them, we wouldn't be in a startup. So like, I think, but then over time you'd be like, oh, well, so last time we estimated that thing as 2 points or whatever, and how does that compare? And I think it takes a little while, but you get in a rhythm.
And maybe my point was a bit too complicated. What I was trying to demonstrate was that you're not actually taking the estimates that the developers are giving you and taking them to the business. You're actually finding out what those estimates costed at the end of the day, averaged out over time, and you're actually just explaining the cost of the estimate, not the estimate itself.
Yeah. I think that I for one, like, I didn't really used to like estimation, but I get it now. And I think I've changed because I feel as though, particularly in a startup, it's your way of communicating how much you're betting actually. Like you're betting $50,000 on this, like, and that resonates. And maybe in larger companies, maybe it's a different reason you're doing the estimation, but certainly with startups, I can understand that for sure.
100%.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit more as well about the role of you guys and your role in educating. And I think Karina mentioned it a while ago, and also I think you guys mentioned it in prioritization process. How have you gone about educating people that are maybe don't come from a tech background, don't really know about agile, don't really know about lean startup and all these different things, like tech guys will be hired, they'll come and talk about all this stuff, and like people at the top are like, I actually have no idea what you guys are talking about. Like, tell me about this, like refer me to some books. How do you guys go about that within the organization?
I mean, like, just like from my experience, like I love educating people about and being really transparent about our process, like you get lots of incoming requests, and it's really common, like, your product team, you're all quite tech savvy, but then everyone else who gets hired around you isn't necessarily. But I do feel like if you're in a tech startup, it's valuable for everybody to have a bit of understanding about how product works and things like that. So I always take the opportunity to educate people and take them through the process and explain, why I think that feature's an awesome idea, but it's going to take us, X number of points or X number of time to build, and the impact is blah. And if you just did that thing manually for a little while, like, you'd probably learn a lot. So yeah, I find it really valuable to really just take everyone along that journey, as I mentioned. So
Yeah, I'd agree a lot. One thing you could try is, if you're able to deliver that kind of roadmap and you know what your next 3 months or 6 months or 12 months looks like, put that artifact in a public place in your company and let people come and talk to you about it, and they'll learn that way. I found that harder obviously in COVID and all right now. We used to actually physically put it on the wall so that everyone could see what our plans were. But yeah, I find that's a good way to let people in a little bit and invite conversations about it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Cool. Switching track a little bit, and keeping with a little bit on the COVID theme, actually. So we're all working quite remotely at the moment, which is different. And even a lot of staff have been onboarded remotely, which is also very different. Have you guys had to, I've been reading a lot on recently about, I've heard of them before. I sort of knew about them, but I hadn't read in depth, but been reading about Basecamp and all, because they've been working remotely for 10 years and the way in which they work is slightly different. Have you guys found that, like, in this particular circumstance, you've had to shift your way of working a little bit with designers and engineers and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I can take that. I guess like I had an interesting experience because I went from Tyro, which is extreme programming. Everyone's at the office at the exact same time. You know, everyone sits next to each other, working 24 hours, like 12 hours a day, which is an amazing experience on itself. It's an interesting way of working, to Bcastle, which is a remote first company. And for me, there's something around the rituals of a workplace, and even just the rituals of building product that's interesting and doesn't convert one-to-one when you move to remote. And it's as simple as like the physical stand-up is a different ritual, and it means different things compared to the virtual, because the virtual for me can tend to be a word splurge, and you Zoom all day, and it's a lot of there's something about the physicalness, I guess, for me, and also for me, also the serendipity of just walking across by each other in the hallways, which for me is the biggest loss. And so the hardest part is creating a culture remotely where expectations are set that you're not annoying people every minute of the day, of course, but that in a way, over communication and nudging and checking in is healthy for everybody. And I think that's been you can work through the rituals and the artifacts and all that type of thing. But for me, that was the biggest change is how do you keep that serendipitous kind of the call or the where you bump into each other. Half the best decisions are made that way, really.
You have to plan for that, don't you? Like, I've actually managed a remote product team for 3 years. So the rest of the business in Melbourne is mostly loosely based around Melbourne, but my engineers are always been remote. And so, you know, we've had to, and I feel like the team dynamic that we've created has helped us move quite quickly. But we've had to, like, we schedule it almost. Like, we have team catch-ups like twice a week where we talk about our work, but we often don't talk about work. And we sort of, we create kind of those moments, I guess. And you have to engineer those moments, because otherwise you completely miss out on all of that.
How about in the, like, you know, previously, and this is something that I'm feeling at the moment, actually, and I've tried to identify the problem and sort of try and solve it in different ways. And one is, like, at the beginning of something, there's, you know, a lack of clarity for everyone involved. And usually you can get everyone into the room, and then eventually, if you spend time and you spend long enough, you'll get clarity. You'll probably get on the same page. But here, if you do the same strategy, get 20 people on a call, it's actually not going to do that. It's probably going to do the opposite. And it's just not effective to have 20 people on a call. So, like, you know, I'm experimenting with, like, having a few people do some work at the outset and creating a bit more clarity before having, like, all the engineers involved. Have you guys seen that? And have you had to shift like some of the ways in which you do discovery or user research and things like that?
Yeah, it's hard. It changes everything. If, as a general thing that helps or might be a useful piece of advice, is you've got to actually shift and ask your team to do more documentation. I know that sounds boring,
Yeah, 100%.
but they've got to work harder to write things down. As you said, like a Hangout or a Skype session just doesn't have the same staying power as a proper meeting. So whether that's more detail in their PRs or more sharing of the design artifacts or process, whatever it is, people just have to commit to sharing their process and writing things down.
You know what?
I'm just going to go and write that down because I need to do that more too.
I actually read something really, really funny on this, and it's almost exactly that they said write things down and send them to people like it's old school. Because if you get them on a call, even like you look at me looking over my shoulder, it's because I think my son's about to run in. And like, that's a lot of people in this current situation. Like, you get them on a call and you're still explaining it to them, but they're thinking about their 2-year-old that's going to run in a second. Whereas if it's all written down, they can consume it at a point when, they really have the time to commit to consume it and reflect on it and, do all of those things.
To connect to a point that Nathan mentioned before, it's the time as well, right? And so maybe you need to be a little bit more focused and give people the time. The worst times in my career as a product manager was when I felt like I was going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting.
Yeah.
And we were directionally getting the right space, but I never got the time to actually kind of sit down and say, well, I've actually thought through the logic of this and I've written it down. And I think everyone in your team, and that may mean you have to deprioritize, right? And be a little bit more focused. That's what kind of...
But then on the flip side, if you're doing the opposite and you're just, spending all your time in a silo on your own, figuring all the things out, that has completely, it's just like this interesting balance you've got to strike, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think I've got, Stephen said the same thing, moving towards asynchronous communication. Yep, absolutely. Just double checking the questions. I don't think we have any other questions. I've got a final question though, which is around hiring. Oh. Now, in startups, often I think people hire generalists. You could say that, like product managers have come from different backgrounds, have a lot of different skills, and then obviously when the company starts to grow, you start to bring on more specialists. And I can see, Karina, like you're obviously hiring a product designer and a couple of other people.
Send me the unicorns. I need the unicorns. I'm sorry, but you must have full closet of hats.
But even those people that you are looking for, I mean, I'll start with you. Are you sort of like looking for someone that is slightly generalist as well and not, that can adapt to different situations in the startup? Yeah.
So specifically, I guess, we've been looking for a designer for a year, and things have changed, and COVID and bushfires and so many things have happened. But I think it is important to be a generalist. I think in a startup, especially for the startup of our size, we really do need someone who can really just jump in on marketing design and product design and be just the leader for design in the business. With the path to eventually maybe become a head of design or whatever, but. At the same time, I know, you've got to be amazing at something, so for us, it's be an amazing visual designer, but also be, have a little bit of experience or a really open willingness to learn all the other areas that come with it. I think that's key. You can be a specialist, but also if you're also someone who's interested in doing, all the things, then that's fine. But if you really are just a specialist and being asked to do all the other things will piss you off, then don't join a startup, or at least not a really early stage startup.
Yeah.
That's all it is. We can all work together and learn,
Yeah.
I think in some ways generalism might just be nothing more than the right attitude. It might just mean your front end developer being happy to write back end code, or your designer being happy to call a customer. So
that's what I'm looking for, is attitude. Are you amazing at something, but are you willing to just roll your your sleeves up? Because I am not a copywriter. I can tell you that right now. But guess what? I've written copy, and quite a lot of it. and you just have to be willing to do it. And I think it's a mindset thing for me. I think Nathan's 100% spot on.
And in a startup, you're such a small, tight-knit team that you can rely on the skills of everybody else. Like I've got people who are doing the social stuff who aren't copywriters, but they hit me up, hey, Karina, can you proof this social media post before I post it? It's like, you know, just find the strengths in the whole team. Everyone's good at something, you know, you'll eventually like kind of build it up and people can be there to support you where your blind spots are. So yeah.
I like that. I think we're going to end with that actually. Thank you guys so much. It's been really good actually, really insightful. Enjoyed all 3 talks. They're really good. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks and I'm not sure what our next topic is. I'm sure Sammy and I will discuss, but if you guys have any requests, like please feel free to contact us. Let us know if there's something you want to learn about. Hopefully everyone will
I'll be getting the meetup link going.
Cool. Sounds good.
Sorry, I think there's a little bit of lag there. I'm gonna get a meetup link going.
Has it just got a bit colder where you are, mate?
Wait.
You got your winter clothes on now. Melbourne, yo.
I'm about to go snowboarding.
Cool. Thanks very much, guys. See you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Awesome. See you. Have a lovely weekend.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
See you. Bye.
Bye.